If you'd asked me many years ago, I wouldn't have expected to be here today making a speech like this. And I'm really disappointed that we still need women's meetings and rallies at all, but we certainly do. 40 years ago, Labour's Barbara Castle passed the Equal Pay Act and the Sex Discrimination Act, right about the same time. I was out of university, I was starting off in journalism, and I thought it was all over. I thought that was it, done and dusted, all done, job done. She fought a very hard fight, including against the trade unions, many of whom were not on her side, in the factories of the West Midlands and car factories in Dagenham. The unions were still insisting on pay agreements that guaranteed women would be paid less than men and kept in specific roles, such as car seat stitching, to make sure that women never took men's jobs. Trade unions didn't see themselves as representing women because they saw women as really only working as to earn pin money. They would threaten to take men's jobs at lower rates of pay. They were not really serious breadwinners. I remember Barbara Castle facing them down to push through equal pay. And when she won, we really did think it was all over. The suffragettes probably thought the same thing when they finally won completely equal voting rights with men in 1928. Somehow we imagined that changing a law changes society. But it takes much more than that. You can outlaw discrimination on paper, but not in men's hearts. Laws usually come after there's been enough of a shift in society to push change through the House of Commons, but that's often not enough to change deep attitudes and behaviour in society. Things are much better now, there's no doubt about that, but with nothing like the equality that I expected back then. Women's lives remain still surprisingly dependent. I think that's the great disappointment. Most people, women and men, want to have children, but it's still women who pay the motherhood price. In most families, having children, it's mothers who will drop back in earnings and hours, letting their partner earn more, and most mothers will never catch up. Sadly, I watched it happening even with my own daughters, to their own surprise and disappointment as well as mine. They have lovely partners, good fathers, nappy changing, loo cleaning, good cooking and ironing men, but all the same, when it came to the crunch and going back to work after a baby, it's still usually the mothers who slacken their careers in one way or another, and the men who keep earning more. A woman with children will still be very much poorer if she tries to bring them up alone. She must depend either on the state or she must depend on a man, as all through history. A depressingly high proportion of women who do make it to the top don't have children, and that's one of the hidden secrets about women at the top, compared with the men who are in the top rank of jobs. So somewhere along the line, those women have had to make a painful choice and make that trade-off. Our most senior woman politician, Home Secretary Theresa May, has no children. Barbara Castle, great fighter for women's rights, most prominent woman politician of her day, had no children. Margaret Thatcher had twins, but I don't think she ever saw them. She had a nanny or two or three. A surprisingly high proportion of women who make it to the top in management and in boardrooms don't have children. Now, that's not a choice men have to make, and not a sacrifice most women are willing to make if that's the one required. Not one I would have made if I'd had to choose between children and a career. Last month, the EU was debating whether to make a quota of 40% of women on public company boards compulsory. Spain, France, Italy, Iceland, Belgium, we shall hear about Norway, already have laws making some kind of quota compulsory. Needless to say, Britain is utterly opposed, as we are to almost anything that has the word Europe attached to it. We do have a group of chairmen in top companies who form the 30% club, including the likes of Sainsbury, Marks and Spencer, and, yes, John Lewis, who are pledging to raise their proportion of boardroom women to 30%. But that's voluntary. It's improving, but let's see if they achieve it. Preparing for this debate on compulsory quotas, the Daily Telegraph, no friend to European ideas, commissioned a professional survey which purported to show that the trouble with women is that they lack aspiration. They are their own worst enemies, the survey concluded. Failure to reach the top is all their own fault. Only 37% aspire to be in any kind of management role. Only 4% aspire to reach the top table. Nearly 20% are happy to be in assistant roles for all of their life. Now, I suspect that this reflects women's realistic assessment of their actual chances of reaching the top while balancing family and caring responsibilities at the same time. Reasonable ambition is tailored to what they see around them and what they know they can handle. Man-shaped jobs that require 12-hour working days, jobs that the alpha male silverbacks occupy, the top of organisations, just don't look like a realistic or even a desirable way of life to most mothers seeking a civilised balance in their lives. When they look at men occupying those top jobs, they can't imagine that those jobs will ever change to accommodate ordinary human beings with ordinary family lives, mothers or fathers. But we need to make sure that these jobs and that culture does change for women's sakes, but for men's sake as well. I just have a very good example from yesterday's Financial Times. It's always the exceptions that really proves the rule. So here is an exception, a bizarre one. One of the very top women is Helena Morrissey, who is Chief Executive of Newton Investment Management, a very big investment company, fund manager, managing £47.5 billion worth of assets, big time. It was she who launched the 30% Club. Excellent. And she has 9 children. Don't you hate her? But most people are not like that. A recent British government report from our business department, a commission chaired by leading banker Lord Mervyn Davies, looked hard at the evidence and found that companies with more women at the top in management and on the board did notably better. Figures pretty sensational. Those companies with plenty of women achieved, listen to this, 42% higher return on sales, 53% greater return on equity, 66% higher return on invested capital. So share tipsters and pension fund managers need do no more than count the number of women at the top of a company to know where to invest their money. Yet in the FTSE 100 companies, the numbers of women are rising, but still shockingly few. Only around 21% of those on boards are women. In the FTSE 250, it falls to 7.8. Average for all public companies across the EU 27 is just 15%. Much worse is top executive roles, as opposed to the non-execs on boards. Executive directors are only 6.3% of the FTSE 100. Business Department report finds that at the present rate of progress, it would take 70 years to reach parity between women and men in the boardroom, and we just don't have that long. It does seem extraordinary that what self-evidently good business and managerial practice is ignored. Now, I don't know whether the success of having a good number of women at the top is just an indicator that an organisation is well-run, open-minded, open to talent from anywhere, or whether there is perhaps some special magic that women themselves bring to management. I'm always a little bit suspicious of the idea that we women have such very different talents, something intrinsically hardwired, feminine and superior or other. Maybe we do, but I think after the experience of Mrs. Thatcher, we all have our doubts. And in a sense, Mrs. Thatcher rather proves the point, because she had to behave like a man and out-tough the men in order to make it. And when she got there, she pulled the ladder up after her and supported no other women following in her wake either, just like a man. But certainly we do bring different experience of life, and that's most important. In retail, social care or hospitality or anything that's people-facing, women are much more likely to be in tune with clients and customers. I can't see what men are doing running big shops, yes, even John Lewis. Women do the face-to-face stuff, and then men run the organisation. Now, I know most of you can beam from ear to ear because most of the cooperative movement is so much better than the rest. And so it should be. But even here, according to your own report, in some cooperative sectors, it's still men that rule the roost, at the top of retailing or at the top of the very, very top of housing co-ops, for instance. Even in the cooperative movement, the women interviewed said there was, quote, a certain degree of fatalism, that's how it is. So even here in your thriving enclave, women also feel that old backward drag. So just for a few minutes, let's just depress ourselves by remembering the high mountain that women still need to climb. Just a few facts. Start with pay, which is always at the heart of everything. 40 years after the Equal Pay Act, women are still earning on average 15% less than men. Only £85 for every £100 a man in the next door desk is getting. And in London, that rises to 23%. That average pay gap hides much greater differences because 40% of women work in the public sector, and in the public sector pay is pretty equal, which means that in the private sector it's far more unequal, much worse. For part-time women, the differential is much greater still. If you think how hard it is to get a good job part-time, that's why mothers returning to work so often drop right down to take jobs below their experience and qualifications. I would like to see, and I would like your organisation, Qualities, to take it on, for the government to take it on, all jobs compulsorily advertised as available either part-time or full-time, so that job sharing became the norm in most work. The Equality Act, which Labour passed shortly before leaving office, did contain a clause requiring bigger companies to publish an annual pay audit, so that at least that makes it transparent how much they're paying their women and their men employees. Sadly, this government has struck out that clause, so Britain retains one of the highest gender pay gaps in the EU, with very little chance for women employees to know if they're being treated unfairly compared with men in the same workplace. Since we have such a large and domineering financial sector, it probably doesn't help that that's where the very worst of equal pay is, a staggering 55% differential, and men get 5 times as big a bonus. It's odd and hard to explain, but since girls for quite a few years now have done so much better at school and better at university, more go to university, get better degrees, it just seems to be that it's not even just motherhood that pulls them backwards, because often from the first day of work they start to fall behind. It may be that they automatically go for the jobs which they know they will work around future motherhood. So perhaps you don't go to be the brain surgeon, you go to be the GP because you know that you could work around that. Perhaps you go to be the nursery nurse assistant while your brother goes to be the engineering apprentice, because you sort of know that will be a family-shaped job. Most depressing of all is that you would expect that it's now nearly 100 years since we had our first woman MP entering Parliament, Nancy Astor, 1919. How can it be we only have 22% of women in Parliament? Only 35% of local councillors are women. Take 150 years to catch up at the present rate in politics. At least women vote rather more than men do. But then you might think, if you're appealing to more women voters, that political parties would try a bit harder to field women candidates, and above all, try harder to offer a society that was fairer to women. It's a mystery to me why they don't approach women in a more positive way, all of the political parties. Why is it still something of an afterthought? For an average family, household, to keep their head above water needs at least a median salary and a half. That means you really need women to be out at work at least part-time. And if they don't, their incomes fall right behind. And that's those sort of static incomes that have been static, the bottom half of society static since 2003, is very often because women don't go out to work nearly as much as in most of the rest of Europe. And one of the reasons is the unaffordability of childcare, which costs an average 27% of household incomes. And women have to earn quite a lot for it to be worth their while working. So childcare and indeed social care is very near the top of the agenda of what women need if politicians were seriously thinking about women's voting. We also have to look at how the great slump and the great cuts made by this government, the great austerity, the pain of that has mainly been borne by women. Many more women work in the public sector, so many more of them have lost their jobs. Cuts to housing benefit hit 1 million more women than men. benefits to help pay the cost of children have been heavily cut, leaving 1 in 5 mothers missing meals to feed their children and 3 food banks a week opening. Why has this happened? The sad irony is that it's because women don't earn as much as men that they are more dependent on payments from the state in tax credits. So when the state cuts back on benefits, of course, it's them earning their sub-survivable pay who get hit hardest. And it's women and the children they care for. So we will expect the poverty figures in Britain to be rising very sharply indeed as a direct result of these cuts to women and children. Why are women still relegated to such low earnings? Partly because the jobs that women do are very segregated, and they're undervalued simply because women do them. The disrespect afforded to the work of caring for the young and caring for the old is in large part because it's women's work. In a terrible loop, there lingers in the background that old essential attitude that women do these caring jobs, well, because they love it, they're good at it, comes naturally, they're born to it, so they don't really need a proper, decent living wage, do they? That applies to catering and cleaning too. The sense this is women's natural place. When men take over any of these roles, they rapidly turn them into higher status work. Look at the difference between being a cook and a chef, for instance. There is a different attitude once work is branded as being men's work to women's work. So how women are rewarded reaches right down into the depths of where women stand in society, what they're worth, how powerful they are, where they belong in the natural order of things. So let's just run through a few of the social aspects and attitudes, revealing glimpses of where women are and why, puzzles perhaps, brutal things that may run counter to all our ideas of modernity. In no particular order, violence against women remains a nasty secret. In Britain, 2 women a week are killed by partners. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence at some point in their lives. Of reported rapes, the number that lead to prosecution is low. Convictions at between 5 and 10%. Women are not believed in court. Women are still sent to prison for offences that men tend not to be in prison for because women's bad behaviour continues to shock judges more than men's. These things are indicators, these are indicators of attitudes towards women, even if they are from the wilder shores of society. We won't even mention 50 Shades of Grey, will we? Or lap dancing clubs, which I really thought were a thing of the past. So what's good about being a woman? That they thrive in the cooperative movement is no surprise, because women are by nature cooperators. I enjoyed reading the report very much from the Cooperative Women's Challenge, A Woman's Place in the Cooperative Movement. Here is a movement that is quite a beacon of progress, and I was glad to see that the reports from the cooperative women interviewed say they found no sense of a glass ceiling, with plenty of positive role models for women's participation. You plainly are working in a better place than most. I like the sentiment expressed by one woman in the report who said, cooperative values are feminine. That is the experience of most women in all walks of life. They are the hubs of community. They are the ones who make things happen. And whether it's at the school gates or at the children's centre, taking action against particularly pernicious cuts at the moment to schools or libraries or hospitals, women are the instinctive cooperators who organise and who collaborate. And I would very much echo what our chair just said, and speaking as the head of the Cooperative Party, so she should. We need to turn those active women into communities into members of political parties, because in the end that's where power is. And if women don't join political parties, get active, if they are alienated by the male ambiance of the House of Commons and by the male aspects of politics, they need to get in there and change it. It is very shocking that in this country only 1% of people belong to political parties, and if you don't join it, you can't change it. So everybody should be encouraged to get stuck in there, however rebarbative they find the certain aspects of politics in Britain. But it is truly impressive, and perhaps not surprising, to see that cooperatives have grown by almost 20% in the recession since the crash, when everything else is flatlining and falling back. Last year, the cooperative sector grew at twice the rate of the rest of the economy. Your Cooperative Women's Challenge, aiming for fair representation at all levels by 2020, is truly inspirational, and I'm sure that you will make it. I just wish I could feel as confident at this present moment in time in the depths of the longest recession we've had since the war, and with a government that seems to me not friendly to women. I wish I could feel as confident about the direction the rest of society is taking at the moment. Thank you very much.
Katrina. Oh, now I'm suddenly mic'd up and shouting at you.